Welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Goodman from Maricopa PD in Arizona, 32 years total in law enforcement. He has a bachelor's of science in criminal justice, a master's of arts in organizational leadership. He's a graduate of the FBI National Academy and a graduate of the California Post Command College. Welcome to the show, Chief Goodman.
Thank you, Paige. It's a pleasure for me to be here this morning.
Thank you. I've interviewed maybe six or seven chiefs from Arizona, and I get really excited because anyone who's listening knows that I was born and raised in Arizona, so home state. Really excited to have you on here today. And I actually lived in Maricopa for a very short period of time, a long time ago, probably like I'm going to age myself, but I probably lived out there in 2010-ish, and it was much, much smaller than it is today. And I know that you guys have had a lot of development and a lot of cool things out there. So I'm excited to highlight you and your city and your organization.
Yes, thank you for that, Paige. And come down anytime. I think that you will be amazed at the development that the city has undergone. Pushing 80,000 now, probably a little bit more than that. We're starting to really get some very, very good investment into the community from large retailers and restaurants. And so it's been great for myself, my family, and our community members to be able to take advantage of all the amenities that come with a rapidly growing city.
Yeah. And for anyone who doesn't know, Maricopa is probably about, would you say about an hour, 45 minutes an hour south of Phoenix. And it's a beautiful area. The views out there are beautiful. And so I will take you up on that someday. I'm going to come out there and I don't even think I'll recognize it, honestly. It was
Yeah, you
farmland
may
when I
not.
lived out there.
Yeah, you may not. And I'm happy to treat you to your favorite lunch spot here in town. We have a much larger variety, I'm sure, than was here in 2010. And yes, we are about 45 minutes to an hour south of Phoenix, the Phoenix metropolitan area. And so, we are still kind of a larger growing city, sort of a mid-sized city that's growing rapidly with a very small town feel to it still.
Yeah.
So it's super cool to be able to, lead our public safety professionals in this challenge that we come up against constantly, which is our population grows by around 6% per year. I think we're in the top five growing cities in the state of Arizona. And then what's also unique about Maricopa is we have a rather large seasonal population.
Mm.
We have a lot of senior citizens that live here as one of our large demographics, and some of them come from cold places. They come here during the summertime or their wintertime to here in the summertime, and they enjoy the warm weather during the winter months because, as you know, Arizona is a wonderful place to live around 9 months of the year.
Yep.
The other three, I thank God every day for the creation of air conditioning
Yep.
because you just run from one air conditioned building to the next and try to keep your car cool, when you're going to it. So those 3 months, understandably, those folks go back to cold places like Minnesota and Canada, and then they come and rejoin us during the winter months. So we get a little bit of an influx during that time for our population. Traffic goes up a little bit. And I always joke that we do not have a changing of the leaves here in Maricopa. We have a changing of the license plates. So
Mm.
we get all different license plates from all throughout Canada and the Midwest. So it's really fun to see every year, and it's really fun to be a police chief in a place that's growing so rapidly.
And for anyone who doesn't know, we call them snowbirds. And they
Correct.
they come out here and they come out here like you said for the winter months because it's so nice and we call them the snowbirds. But I appreciate you popping on here today and talking to us a little bit about wellness and leadership. And I know that you previously came from California. You made your move here to Arizona a few years ago. You work and live in the community of Maricopa. Your family also lives in Arizona as well. So you're invested in being here. And one of the things that popped out to me when I was reading through your bio is that you have a saying when it comes to wellness. I know that this is something that's a huge priority for you. And you say that wellness is not a program, it's a culture. Can you talk a little bit about your philosophy with this?
Yeah, I'll sort of go back to just for some context. I'll go back to how I sort of learned about wellness and law enforcement
Yeah.
to begin with. I was a commander at City of Pasadena, California Police Department. For those who aren't familiar with California, Pasadena is located just northeast of the city of Los Angeles. It's the fourth largest municipality in the county of Los Angeles. And so Pasadena PD had around 230 to 240 sworn officers. It's a rather large organization. And we had a really good, really great progressive chief. His name's John Perez. He's someone that I grew up in the organization with. John had worked at the Pasadena Police Department since the age of 18.
Wow.
And he ascended to become our police chief. And so when I joined Pasadena PD in 1994, he was actually one of my field training officers. And so, yes, he was ahead of me in the organization and promoted ahead of me. But eventually we worked on the same command staff where he was the police chief and I was the commander. And so he calls me into his office one day and he says, "Hey, I want to develop a wellness program here at Pasadena PD. I think there's a need." And there was. And I said, "What is this wellness thing you speak of?" And so he kind of sort of told me about the concept. It was rather new in law enforcement at that time. And so he allowed me to reach out to some really talented individuals that we had in house at Pasadena PD and create one of the first wellness programs in the state of California.
Wow.
But the more we went through it, I realized that yes, we can have a wellness program, but maybe we should try to incorporate wellness into our overall department culture.
Mhm.
And so I started to think about it. And of course, I was able to have the opportunity to attend the FBI National Academy. And wellness was a really robust topic at the FBI NA. In fact, I attended a class that dealt with managing organizations and leading and managing organizations and employees in crisis. And so one of the overarching themes of these classes and the discussions was how can we prevent this from happening to begin with? How can we prevent people from, having that catastrophic event occur in their lives, whether it's physical, emotional, psychological? How can we prevent that from happening to our law enforcement officers and our public safety professionals when we invest so much into them and into ourselves and into our organizations? Because for smaller organizations, the loss of just a couple of people can be very, very impactful. And so, I got to thinking about it and I thought to myself, wellness is not a program. Wellness is a culture. And so when I became the police chief here in Maricopa in 2023, I said, we are going to have a culture of wellness. And it starts with people living and working in a place, not living, but sometimes it seems like it, working in a place where it's okay not to be okay. And I know we've said that, that's kind of a common saying,
Mhm.
in the wellness space. But really, we have to have a culture that supports that. We can have that slogan on the wall, "It's okay not to be okay." We can have it in 80-point font up on the main hallway of our police department, but it won't mean anything if we don't back it up with a way to support it. And so I came to the conclusion that we need to support it holistically on every level, from leadership, from management, from having an in-house professional that is culturally competent, that can help point our employees in the direction that they need to go if they need resources, by building in fitness programs and emotional support programs and all those things for our sworn and our professional staff employees. And so I embarked upon this journey, and my city was very, very supportive of the notion and have supported me ever since in making sure that I have the tools that I need to make sure that we are investing in our employees and keeping them well and happy to the extent that we can, and healthy and emotionally stable and resilient. You know, because we don't want we need to hire for resilience,
Mhm.
right? We need to make sure our people are resilient because we see things that people should never see. We hear and do things that most of the people in our general population will never see, hear, or do. And that's part of that's kind of part of the allure sometimes of being a police officer is, the adventure. Every day is something new. Every day is something different, and that draws a lot of people into the profession. But there is a dark side to that. There's a negative side to that that we really need to acknowledge and make sure that our people are well taken care of so they can be resilient. So we want them to be okay, not being okay, but we also need them to be resilient, right? So there's
Right.
a dichotomy there, and that's part of the balancing act and part of the culture as well.
Yeah, now there's so many things I want to dive into with what you just said. So bear with me. I'm going to go one at a time here, but I appreciate your emphasis on how do we be proactive. I think that historically it was all very reactive. It was, okay, we're going to deal with a problem when there's a problem. We're going to deal with an injury when there's an injury. We're going to deal with a mental health crisis when there's a crisis. And so for you to pull it forward and say, we don't want these things to happen. Is it going to be elimination of everything? Probably not. We're probably going to see injuries. We're probably going to see, some mental health issues and, things that we need to address. But can we significantly reduce those numbers and reduce that risk? 100%, and so for you to say, we're going to pull this forward, we're going to make this a part of the conversation early. We're going to have the tools and resources and conversations on a day-to-day basis so that we can reduce that risk, I think is very smart. And it kind of goes against, I think, our human nature sometimes, because I think that sometimes we're not always inherently proactive when it comes to our own wellness. Usually it's addressing it once we have an issue. Um, I know you said making sure that you have your leadership teams on board and you create that environment where it's okay to not be okay. And then you also have the resources available proactively. What was your first step coming into the organization of making sure that your entire leadership team was on the same page? And what are maybe some of those conversations that you have on a consistent basis, or the actions that you guys are taking on a consistent basis to create that environment?
Yeah, that's a great question, Paige. And it was interesting because I came in to this police department as an outsider.
Right.
And so, in addition to bringing new ideas and new ways of doing things to a department, you're also building trust with the command staff members that are already there. And so it was, really one of the first things I like to do as a leader, and this is part of incorporating leadership, into the wellness concept is establishing clearly defined expectations. My expectation is that we're going to take care of the people that work with us. My expectation is that we're going to provide them a support system, that we're not just going to abandon them. My expectation is that we're going to closely monitor our personnel that we're working so closely with. And if we see something that seems a little out of character for somebody, that we have a relationship with that person, that we can go to them and say, "Hey, Paige, I noticed that you're struggling with this. Are you okay? Is everything okay?"
Mhm.
That's not something that we used to do at all in law enforcement. There was no concept of wellness. There was really no concept of emotional intelligence. There was really no concept that leadership can be tied to keeping our people well. These are all things that have evolved in our profession over the last 3 decades, and it will continue to evolve as we move forward with technology and with different ways of thinking and with innovation. All these things will continue to evolve and be positive things for our public safety and professionals. And so, really it was kind of, wading into the deep end, kind of taking a crawl, walk, and then run type of perspective. And so one of the first things I did was, of course, make my expectations clear, to the people who help me lead this department. I do not do it by myself. I have a robust team of highly educated, smart professionals who help me every single day to make sure that we're moving forward with our mission. But make the expectations clear and then start building these systems around it to start supporting that culture. I was very fortunate because when I came here, the city was just getting ready to embark upon building a brand new police station.
Mm.
The old police station had been there for a number of years. It didn't really have the facilities to support a culture of wellness. And so I was really, really fortunate that I was able to sort of weigh in as the chief on things that were important infrastructure wise to support a culture of wellness. So one of those things is having an exercise facility for our personnel. Our old police facility here in the city of Maricopa, unfortunately, did not have an exercise facility. There was no gym for our people. And so I made sure that we had a really nice gym for them to go to. We want to make sure that we have a facility for people just to relax, just to chill out. Um, it's important to make sure that we have policies for equipment that support their wellness. A great example is the heat, and we kind of alluded to it earlier, right? I wanted to make sure that our people had the ability to take off their protective vests and their gear when they're here inside the station so they can be cool and their physical well-being is taken care of. To support that from an infrastructure standpoint, we designed a room here inside the police station that I've dubbed the Zen Den.
Mhm.
And we also have one on the dispatch side because we incorporated a brand new dispatch center here as well. And so the Zen Den is a place where our people can go just to chill out and to get all those things to separate themselves away from those stresses during their daily lives of being police officers and dispatchers. So I made sure that that room was well equipped, that it could have a place to hang up your vest, that had a place for people to sit down and be cool, and they could do aromatherapy, and they could do light therapy, and they could do movement therapy. And even we've had folks use it to do actual therapy sessions with our culturally competent cadre of mental health professionals. And so it's been amazing. And then from a policy standpoint, let's build in wellness from a policy standpoint as well. So we built in something into our policy called the power hour. So every single day that every single one of my employees is here, they have an opportunity to take 1 hour per day to do what we call power hour. And the power hour with supervisor approval can be used to do a workout. It can be used to chill out in the Zen Den. It can be used to spend quiet time with yourself. It can be used for anything that's productive that moves towards wellness, whether it's physical, emotional, or psychological. The only requirement is that we know where you're at
Mm.
so that we can come and get you out of the Zen Den or wherever it is you are in case we have a critical incident occur here in the city. Other than that, the limitations are there's not a lot of limitations. So some people use it to quietly collect their thoughts. Other people use it for meditation. Other people use it to go in there and really put in a good solid workout. Other people use it for prayer time or emotional or spiritual support. I encourage all those things.
Mm.
And so it's built right into our policy that people can do that. Those are some of the things that I talk about when we go from a when we go from a wellness program to a wellness culture, that
Mhm.
we really, as a leadership team, look at it a lot more holistically than just having a program where if we have a critical incident, then maybe we do a critical incident debriefing, a SISM.
Right.
Those are all good things. Um, but taking it away from being programmatic based to cultural based, I think really makes a difference in the lives of our employees.
And I want to touch on that last piece that you just said of it making a difference in the lives of the people that work with you within the organization. I think a lot of times we get wrapped up in a lot of the um, maybe money side or metric side, but I want to talk a little bit about the ROI because I think that when we think about what is the return on investment for these things, what is the actual mission for these things? And so, what are you seeing as you start to implement this as a part of the culture of the organization? What is the ROI that you guys are seeing as far as morale, performance, service to the community? Are you seeing a direct reflection of the efforts that you're putting in the organization and the well-being of your team.
Yeah, so we can talk about things anecdotally quite a bit about how these things move the needle on wellness and on mental health and things like that. But let's really start with talking about, say, for instance, injury rates. Statistically speaking, we were having a rather large number of injuries around 3 years ago when I first got here, and injuries are very common in law enforcement, as you know.
Mhm.
I'm sure we'll talk about our people being tactical athletes and investing in their athletic ability, so to speak.
Mhm.
But injuries is being a police officer is like playing in the NFL. It's not a matter of of whether or not you will be hurt. It's a matter of when and how bad. And so we want to try to prevent those injuries to begin with. And so when I got here, I saw some of the same injuries that I'd seen historically throughout my law enforcement career: knees, backs, shoulders, and then other injuries associated with use of force. And so let's look holistically about preventing injuries, and let's just focus for a moment on use of force.
Mhm.
And bear with me here because it's going to be kind of a long path to make the connection, but I hope that you're going to see it along the way. Using force in law enforcement is one of the unfortunate byproducts of doing this job. The reality is not everybody wants to go to jail. Nobody wants to go to jail, but some people will physically resist you in order to prevent from doing so. And so that's one of the realities, is having to physically exert ourselves to affect an arrest. And sometimes those things cause injury. And so I thought one of the things that we had been doing at my previous agency was really doing something that's been common in the professional sports world for some time, and that is looking at game film. Almost every law enforcement agency in America has body worn cameras now in some way, shape, or form, right? And so I said, you know what? Let's look at our game film. Let's figure out how we can use force better and more effectively, and therefore prevent physical injury, and therefore keep our employees healthier while they're performing this job. So even though it may sound like it's strictly policy based, the use of force reviews that we started to institute here at Maricopa PD, the end result is twofold. It's threefold, really. Number one, we're more effective at using force when we need to do so. Number two, we're building community trust because those uses of force are typically shorter, and they don't involve people being punched or kicked, or some of the more dramatic things that we see during use of force incidents. While those things may be appropriate and completely appropriate under a policy or even the law, the fact is that most of our serious injuries occur is when we decide to punch suspects because we don't do it properly, and so we end up hurting ourselves. So let's get better at using force and not do those things so we can drive our injury rate down and keep our people happy and on the job. And so we started to do use of force reviews. And just as expected, we did start to move the needle on having articulable reductions in uses of force, articulable reductions in uses of strikes that cause injuries both to suspects and to officers. And we really started to move the needle on those types of things. So that's some data that is articulable. Some of the rest of it remains anecdotal. We don't ever know how many mental health or stress claims we might have throughout the course of the year.
Right.
But I think we have had less recently than in the recent past. As you know, Arizona has a very robust state law that is designed to help with officer wellness. It's called the Craig-Tiger Act. And so officers are able to get visits paid for by the city for mental health related issues. And it's been great. Now, we have seen a bit of an increase maybe in Craig-Tiger usage, but is that necessarily a bad thing? No, not necessarily. Not
Mhm.
at all. It means people are trying to maintain, they recognize that they need to seek that assistance because, again, It's okay not to be okay, and we're going to support that culturally. And B, it helps keep them on the job, and it helps keep morale higher.
Mhm.
And so I found that by supporting wellness culturally in a holistic manner, it drove it drove morale up. And when I hire people, I have the privilege of doing chief's interviews with them prior to hiring them, so I can ask them, "Why do you want to work here? Why do you want to be a police officer?" But I tell them that working here is different than at other law enforcement agencies because of our culture, and because you're not going to be just a number. We're going to get to know one another, beyond just saying hello in the hallways.
Mm.
I make it a point to learn the first names of all of my police officers, everybody who works here, so that I can greet them by their first name in the hallway. That's very, very powerful. I will never forget the first time that one of our command staff members spoke to me using my first name in the hallway. Even though it's a very small gesture, it really contributed to, making to my positive morale. So I'm like, oh, people care about me. And so I tell them, this is a place where we're going to care for you. And I also meet with the families during the academy graduation. I keep it short because I realize that I'm the only thing standing between them and a celebration with their family. But I tell the families, it's our intention to maintain and retain your loved one long term. I want to hire people to stay here for long term, their entire careers, 20 years. It's it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so I try to tell the families, I make it very, very point that we're going to do our level best to to return your family member to you as good or better than
Mm.
when they started this job. And that starts with our culture.
Yeah. Wow. I I love that you said making people feel valued goes a long way, even but just by knowing their first name. It sounds so simple, but I agree with you. It's huge. It's huge to feel like you're not just a number, that you're a valued member of the organization. And so thank you for sharing everything that you guys are doing. But I do want to circle back to the tactical athlete piece of it, because I want to make sure we cover that before the end of our conversation. I agree with you. I think we're very much aligned in this idea that law enforcement are professional tactical athletes. And I did a presentation on this recently for a chief conference, and we took a look at how do professional athletes train. And you and I talked about this a little bit offline. And of course, that's their full-time job, right? Like they have the facilities, they have the money, they have all the things, but it's not really the money as much as it is the methods that we look at. What are those methods in which they use to be successful? And I dove into it really deep, and I really tried to look at who are the people who have had longevity in the career and quality of life. So, who are those people who have been in it for a really long time with very few injuries? What did they do? And I took a look at two different athletes. One was LeBron, one was Tom Brady, because they are the oldest in the history of their sports, right? LeBron's still going, Tom Brady, oldest starting quarterback in the history of NFL, 9 Super Bowls, very successful athlete. And both of them had very, very similar training methods. And they focused on sleep and recovery, nutrition, mental training. And then for injury prevention, it was all pliability, mobility type exercises, right? They were really focusing on how can they be agile and how can they move. So you mentioned earlier shoulders, backs, knees. We see hamstrings too. That's all considered musculoskeletal for injuries, right? So how can we take a look at these methods, and then how can we apply that in a way that makes sense for law enforcement? Because it is unique. It's a piece of what you guys do, and you guys have different schedules. You have different job duties that you have to manage and juggle on top of the training component. But I think if we can start to have those conversations of, okay, how do they do it? And then how can we realistically implement that here within the law enforcement profession in a way that makes sense? So for you guys saying Zen Den, recovery, right? Rest and recovery. How can we have time to offload some of those stuff or those things that you guys are going to go through and have more of that resting period? From the fitness component, we know that muscle is incredibly important for injury prevention. So having a workout facility, how can we also incorporate some of that mobility and pliability into the mix because we know that's going to reduce injuries. So I think if we can start to kind of dissect each one and then ask the question, how can we adapt this in a way that makes sense for law enforcement? We're going to start to see a lot more success in longevity and quality of life as we go along. And I also think it's important to note that, and I say this, tell me if you disagree. This is my opinion, so you can tell me if you disagree. But I think it's important to note that professional athletes don't say wellness and then they and training. It's just training. It's a part of what they do. So for what you said, like this is our culture. This is what we do. It's not a program. It's what we do on our day to day. It's the same with professional athletes. Like that is their regimen. That is the norm. They're not dissecting them. They're saying this is what we do on a day to day. And I think if we can make that a part of the conversation of like, it's not training and wellness, it's all together. It's the full picture of what we're trying to do to make sure everybody's successful.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, let me correlate back to the early '90s and talk about how cops. You kind of touched on it. Let's talk about how cops used to do workouts. All right, under keeping in mind we're talking about tactical athletes, right? Here was your typical cop workout in 1994 when I first started to be a police officer. A 3-mile run, usually outside in the heat, if you could, the hotter the better. As many hills as you could find, as fast as you could go, followed by an hour of lifting as heavy as possible.
Hmm.
That was it. That's what we did. That was the industry standard workout, so to speak, for police officers. Let's evolve. 30 years later, what are some of the best best practice techniques for being physically fit to be a tactical athlete? Well, running 3 miles is not one of them. Running 3 miles every day is not one of them. Let's look at what we actually go through when we actually have to, as I like to say, do police work.
Hmm.
It's usually high intensity. It's usually a short period of time. And if you've ever been in a fight with somebody, a real fight with somebody, a fight for your life, 1 or 2 minutes seems like an eternity. So let's build our workout culture so that it is geared towards doing those very things. So running 3 miles, followed by lifting as heavy as we possibly can, um, is not it.
Hmm.
That does not build flexibility. It probably builds strength. It might build size, but it's really not consistent with what we actually have to do. And so, what's great is, I'm going to date myself here,
Okay.
but most of the police officers that I hire now are the same ages as my kids. I have 3 adult children, and so it's really humbling when you have someone in for a chief's interview and you look at their birth date and you realize that that you've been a cop a long time. And you're like, oh wow, like that's it's kind of humbling actually. But our people who are in their 20s and 30s now, they work out totally different than
Hmm.
we used to, back in the Stone Ages. And so, really, when we talk about performing well as police officers, we have conversations, at least here internally, about like, what do we do to get better to do our jobs? And so, here at Maricopa PD, our units kind of like to work out together. And so, I do not see them doing those old school, SWAT style workouts. I see them doing things that I know, based upon my training and education, are going to help them be better tactical athletes,
Hmm.
right? And so the days of running 3 miles and then lifting are kind of behind me. Although I did share with you that I am training for a half marathon, so Yes, I will be guilty of doing some long runs and perhaps lifting a little bit afterwards. But really, what we're seeing in the way that our gym is designed is to do those high intensity, short burst types of workouts, those HIIT workouts.
Hmm.
And our people do them, which is amazing. And so that's sort of the culture of the department. It's not, getting huge. It's about being flexible. It's about being strong. It's about being able to address threats in real time as we see them. Um, Super important. And so, I'll walk into the gym, I hear our people in there because their music is probably too loud. Again, dating myself. And I'll walk in and they'll be doing things that I never used to do when I was their tenure in my police career. They'll be
Yeah.
sprinting on the treadmill and then getting off and doing some lifting and then doing things that are really building that both their aerobic and their anaerobic capacity, to really do their jobs. And then supporting that with diet and nutrition. Unfortunately, we do have a vending machine here in the building, but not a lot of people use it. And we also have a really nice break area for our people. And so I want them to gather there. I want them to prepare meals and bring them in to eat together, because that builds camaraderie, but it also makes sure that we're not eating, a huge greasy pizza every day, and offsetting all that good work that we're doing in the gym. And then making sure we're supporting that psychologically. Every single year, every one of my police officers and dispatchers has to do a mental health check-in with our culturally competent mental health professional team. And we have two or three people that they can choose to go see. It's usually done online, so it's convenient for them, but it is mandatory.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not trying to discipline anybody for not doing their mental health check-in, right? We want it to be mandatory/voluntary. It's kind of like leadership. People will do what the supervisors say because they have to, but we want our people to do what their supervisors want them to do because they want to.
Right.
There's a distinct difference there. And so we want to make sure that they feel supported in that way. And so that's what athletes do.
Hmm.
They do all those things. They tie all those things together in their training regimen, right? They work out, they stretch, they do their physical stuff, but they also do their mental stuff. They also do their psychological stuff. Um, Many athletes do visualization
Yep.
techniques where they visualize themselves succeeding on the playing field. Police officers need to do the same thing. We need to be visualizing. I tell my young officers at the end of every shift, and I do spend time with my officers regularly. I make it a point to spend time with them as soon as they get out of the academy, not only to tell them what my expectations are, but to also tell them to think beyond, think outside the box when we're dealing with law enforcement. So I tell them, you guys are athletes. You guys are at the pinnacle of your fitness and of maybe not their technical skills when they're new out of the academy, but certainly their fitness is very, very good. And they're going to be learning to be drinking out of a fire hose every single day, learning how to do this job, developing and crafting their skills. I tell them to be really good at your skills. You need to be visualizing.
Yep.
You need to be sitting at home thinking about with your eyes closed, thinking about how you're going to respond to those high stress calls for service. Man with a gun, baby not breathing, um, medical emergencies that we're always first to, large crashes, people actually trying to hurt us and potentially kill us.
Hmm.
We need to visualize those things so we're not seeing it for the first time when it actually happens. If we've already played it out in our heads, we've already realized that we need to have a pre-rehearsed course of action, which will help, keep us safe, but also help us perform at a much higher level than if we weren't doing that at all.
100%. I don't know if you know this, but actually, and this is full circle, the reason why I moved to Maricopa in 2010 was because I was a professional skydiver and I skydived in Eloy, which is probably another 30, 40,
Mhm.
south of you guys. I ended up moving to Eloy after that, but I was a professional skydiver for a period of time. This was before I was in this, law enforcement space. And I trained military for advanced maneuvers in the sky. So I trained EOD, and that is what we did, visualization. It was very tactical. It was from step one all the way to getting on the ground safely. How are we visualizing? And you're right. How do we visualize how to be successful and do everything correctly? But how can we also visualize and prepare ourselves for if things do not go correctly? What is the course of action if we mess up a maneuver? What's the course of action if you have a malfunction with your parachute? What is the course of action if you are outside of the landing zone and you have to land out in the middle of the desert? So I love that you said that. And I think that if we can have these conversations, because I think historically this idea of mental health or mental training has been viewed as kind of this soft woo-woo thing. But if we can say, hey, like we trained military how to do this effectively, like really high performing explosive ordnance disposal guys are doing this. Professional football players are doing this. How can we have these conversations of, like you said, this is tactical training. This is what's going to make you effective. It's not woo woo. It's not soft. It's super backed by science. It's super effective. And the highest of highest performing athletes are doing these things. And I think by us having this conversation, it makes it feel stronger. It makes it feel more tactical than like this. I call it the cotton candy effect, where it just feels kind of like, you don't really know if there's any substance behind it. And when we can sit here and have a real conversation of like, hey, this is actually backed. And the NFL is not going to pay for a sports psychologist on the field with you if it's not effective. They're not going to invest money in these training methods if it's not effective. Their goal is to protect the assets at all cost, and their players are their assets. For you guys within the organization, you guys are the assets. So how can we protect you at all costs? And I really do believe that wellness is a part of safety training. The more we can prepare you for these things physically, mentally, emotionally, the more effective decisions that you can make, the safer you're going to be out on the streets.
You're 100% correct, Paige. Because when at the end of the day, decision making is at the heart of law enforcement.
Mhm.
It really is. It boils down to decision making. We're asking our people to make split second decisions that could impact not only their lives, but the lives of others very, very long term. And so it's decision making, it's knowing what we're going to do and when we're going to do it in circumstances that are completely unpredictable.
Mhm.
And unless our people are prepared to do so physically, emotionally, and psychologically, we are putting them at a disadvantage in a situation where we're already at a disadvantage because the bad guys already know what they're going to do.
Mm.
We are already operating at a disadvantage. And so the best police officers focus on constantly improving their craft, constantly improving themselves, both professionally and personally, and then also focusing on on that holistic wellness. And so if we can support that culturally
Mhm.
here at our department, then we're going to do everything that we can to support that, within our means. And we just need to be creative and we just need to make sure that our people feel supported in doing these things and be open to suggestion. I am rarely the smartest person in the room. And so I really do encourage suggestions, especially from our younger people.
Yeah.
They are the ones that are exposed to all this technology and all of these cutting edge ideas. I certainly am not. I am doing all the work that I became a police officer to avoid to begin with here in my office, shuffling around budgets and numbers and deployments and all those things, right? And yes, I love it. And I get all kinds of good, great gratification from seeing our people succeed. It brings me joy to watch our people succeed and to see the fruits of their labor, result in bringing a bad guy, to justice. But we can't do that without supporting them holistically and listening to their ideas and making them feel valued. And when they come to me, I say the idea factory is open 24/7. All right. My door's open most of the time. If it's closed, it's because I'm probably in a really boring meeting or doing something that I just need to really focus on. But other than that, you are welcome to come into my office and have a discussion. And so, making sure that they feel supported in that way is important. And then listening,
Yeah.
listen to the ideas. Even though they may not be immediately applicable, they are still things that are resonating with our employees. And if we can do that for them in some small way, then it just helps to make them feel valued. And again, ties back into that culture of support and wellness.
100%. I feel like we could talk forever, but I know we're butting up on time here. And so I do want to ask my final question. If you could leave one piece of advice for the younger generation, a little nugget of wisdom to leave with the younger generation, what would that be?
So I'll leave you with two things. The first thing is never forget that law enforcement is a noble profession. No matter what the narrative is around us or the things that are happening around us societally, law enforcement is a noble profession, and you are needed and you are valued by your community and you are supported regardless of what you may feel or hear. Never be discouraged and think that you lost your way in terms of law enforcement being one of the most noble professions that you can ever do. The second is always remember your why. We all got into policing and public safety for a reason. And over time, we tend to lose our why. So if you ever feel like you're just exasperated or frustrated or needing a change or whatever the case may be, try to think back to your why. And if your why is solid, then it'll bring you back to your North Star and you'll feel more invigorated and you'll be ready to serve with the same heart that you had, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 years into the profession. Because the reality is that if you allow this job to be, it will be a daily drop of corrosion on your soul.
Mm.
And I know that sounds horrible, but it's the truth. And we need to accept it. And we need to know that it's out there and we need to know how to fight it. And knowing your why is part of that. So never forget your why.
Thank you. Chief Goodman, thank you so much for coming on here and sharing about your agency and your culture. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, Paige. It's been a pleasure.
Of course.